Thank you so much, Yoon. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the concluding session of our 9-part dialogue series to promote LGBTQI plus inclusion beyond the binary. My name is David Rands, and I am the U.S. Consul General here in Mumbai. I am thrilled to be here. We had over 500 registrants for this event, and I just checked now, we're about 150 participants already. I think this is a sign of just how enthusiastic the Indian business community is about this topic, and I'm excited for our conversation. For nearly a year, this initiative of the U.S. Consulate General has celebrated the LGBTQI plus community, and we hope help forge change toward a world where all are welcome to be their true and full selves through greater awareness of the issues faced by the LGBTQI plus community. Through Beyond the Binary, we have celebrated the accomplishments of some of India's most influential LGBTQI plus activists and leaders, explored how LGBTQI plus rights have expanded in multiple countries, including India and the United States, and examined the deep and lasting influence of family members on LGBTQI plus individuals. A common theme that has emerged in these disparate conversations is the role that economic independence plays in the security and well-being of LGBTQI plus individuals. This is why tonight's discussion is such a fitting conclusion to the series. A good friend of the consulate and inspirational activist for LGBTQI plus inclusion, Harish Iyer, often says, the onus of inclusion must always lie with those who are already included. With this message in mind, I am thrilled that this evening we will hear from Amitav Chaudhary, Managing Director and CEO of Axis Bank Limited, and Mahesh Zurale, Accenture's Senior Managing Director and CEO of Accenture's Advanced Technology Centers in India. Both these business leaders have taken Iyer's message to heart and, more significantly, put it into action. On the panel, we also have one of India's most influential champions for diversity and inclusion, Zainab Patel, who will share her deep experience as an activist for transgender rights, health, and social development. Finally, I am thrilled and honored that the U.S. Special Envoy to advance the human rights of LGBTQI plus persons, Jessica Stern, has done us the honor of moderating this discussion, bringing her global perspective to our understanding of this issue. Thank you, Amitav, Mahesh, Zainab, and Jessica. Before I yield the floor, I would also like to thank the host of tonight's webinar, the Confederation of Indian Industry. CII has been a terrific partner in hosting a series of webinars to promote U.S. and India trade, and I am grateful to add LGBTQI plus workplace inclusion to our range of engagements with them. Up until now, I have framed the issue of LGBTQI plus inclusion in the workplace as a moral imperative, which I personally believe it is. But I think today's discussion will also underscore the compelling practical incentives and business reasons to be more LGBTQI plus inclusive organizations. Thanks again to our speakers, and a special thanks to all of our viewers for joining. Special Envoy Stern, over to you.
Thank you so much, David. I'm so pleased to be here today, and I'm joining everyone from Amsterdam, where I am working at the moment. So it's very nice to feel like I get a little taste of visiting all of you, even though the pandemic makes it a little bit hard to be there in person. I thought that I would just start with a really heartfelt note of appreciation to Consulate General Mumbai's initiative to organize the Beyond the Binary series. And I have to be honest, I don't see this from embassies and consulates everywhere. I wish I could say this is a regular occurrence, but actually this series is one that I see as a model of excellence from the US State Department. And the reason why it's so singular is because we can get into the pattern of really just engaging with LGBTQI plus rights in response to a crisis, or perhaps during the traditional US celebration of Pride in June. But this series dives deeply and actually shows the breadth and complexity of the issues facing LGBTQI plus persons. So it's really great. I just want to congratulate all of you. I noticed a moment ago we have almost 200 people who already joined in. So it's a testament to your success in organizing this series. I also wanted to just say how honored I am to be speaking with LGBTQI people, business leaders, straight and cisgendered, human rights defenders, and allies from India. On a personal level, some of my greatest teachers and friends have been drivers of progress for LGBTQI rights in India. And I watched the legal strategies and community organizing to overturn Section 377 with enormous interest over the years. And the really incredible thing has been watching the impact of decriminalization in India reverberate around the world. And so, I think back to the verdict and how it said not only that Section 377 had harmed LGBTQI persons, but the court actually acknowledged and even apologized to LGBTQI plus persons' families who had been hurt. And I think that's sort of a through line to our conversation today. When LGBTQI plus persons experience discrimination and violence, whether it's in the workplace, the home, the streets, or at school, it hurts them without a doubt, but it also hurts all of the people who love and care for them. So when we talk about countering discrimination and violence, we really have to talk about it as whole communities. And so it really feels essential to talk about workplace inclusion. And I thought I would just offer a couple of data points from the United States to underscore how urgent this issue is in the United States, in India, and every country on the planet. The Williams Institute summarized the gravity of the situation in the US, and I'll just give a couple of examples. 22% of LGBT people in the United States live in poverty, compared with 16% of cisgendered or straight people. And that data varies significantly when you apply a gender analysis. 29% of trans people live in poverty, which by any measure is an unacceptable number. 18% of lesbians live in poverty. 12% of gay men live in poverty. And the point I make in bringing this data into our conversation is partially a point about intersectionality. And what I'm trying to say is that we not only have to fight for LGBTQI plus inclusion and equity, but we also have to talk about women's rights and gender equality, or else we really won't get at the core issues. So with that, I will get off my soapbox and I will turn to our extraordinary panel. Amitav Chowdhury, I think I will ask the first question of you. So let me start with an easy one. What motivated you to adopt more LGBTQI plus inclusive policies in your workplace? I think you have to unmute your mic.
We all muted and then forget that we muted it. Sorry, apologies. Let me first thank David and Jessica Yu for inviting me to this panel. Really appreciate it. Well, for us, the question was not why we decided to adopt it, but the question was why not? I think over the last couple of years, we've been asking ourselves as an organization that are we adopting all the global practices of the right things to do? And as part of that evolving workplace, we were very clear that each one of our colleagues should be able to bring their whole selves to work. And research shows and data shows that when we build happy, productive workplaces, and when our colleagues are focused on work rather than concentrating on all their efforts on concealing who they are, it does make a huge difference. So given what is the organization we were trying to build, in a way, it was an easy choice that we first need to start looking at it positively. We should do it. And one of the first inspired choices we actually made, because David quoted Harish, was to get a person like Harish on board. And he, along with Vaijayanti, I think has made a huge difference to our way of thinking and moving forward on what do we do about adopting more LGBTQI and inclusive policies in the organization. We do believe that when people come to work with their authentic selves, they help a culture which is distinctive, is valued, differences are seen as an asset rather than a liability. And, obviously we keep our eyes and ears close to the ground, and what we've heard from, you mentioned the families of some of these people, is they're just overwhelmed that we are actually reaching out with our arms open to welcome these people to the fold of Access and ensure that they get a real, honest, transparent, and a very healthy place to do their work and obviously be what they are. And you know, we have also come out with a charter, Come As You Are, Charter of Policies and Practices, which is a long commitment to the whole initiative. And we want to build our businesses on the principle of inclusion. As you quoted Harish Iyer, financial inclusion cannot be to the exclusion of historically marginalized. We need to ensure that the people who are included have to work hard to ensure the people who are excluded, and that's precisely what we are doing. I think the principle we are adopting is very, very simple. It's not a question of just accepting how people are. It's a question of actually respecting what they are, and not only respecting it, but actually doing something about it. And that's what made us, you know, go and embrace this whole initiative. And we are delighted with the progress we have made. And frankly, the question we're asking ourselves, why didn't we do it earlier?
I see why you were invited to speak. That was such an inspiring answer. I really appreciated that. And I just want to quote you because it gave me chills. It's not a question of accepting who people are, but respecting who people are and doing something about it. And I think that really rings true for this conversation. I just want to share that I'm posting the bios in the chat because these are extraordinarily accomplished people, and that is a way of getting to see a little bit of the breadth of what they've done and focus on the conversation. So I just posted Amitabh's bio, and shortly we'll post the others. Let me go next to you, Mahesh Zurali. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I have actually worked with colleagues at Accenture over the years, and it's really nice to sort of make the connections from the people that I've worked with in New York or Washington to Mumbai. And I'd like to ask you the same questions because Accenture really has a global reputation on these issues. What made Accenture choose to adopt more LGBTQI inclusive policies? And maybe if I can also ask, and you know, how does that change the workplace for you?
So first of all, thank you, Jessica and David, for inviting me. It's really my pleasure to participate in the discussion on such an important topic today. There are several business reasons, but before I get to that, like Amitabh said, I think at the end of the day, we must not forget the obligations that all of us have to our fellow human beings. We must follow the principle of equality, and we must make sure that we don't leave anybody behind in the pursuit of our progress. So this is a complex topic, and often one gets into, you know, ambiguous areas, and I always like to anchor discussions back to the fundamental principles. But even wearing a business lens, and LGBTQI inclusion is indeed a business priority for us at Accenture, there are several reasons. I will list some of them. We belong to the technology industry, and innovation is the name of the game for that matter. I don't think there's any CEO today, I mean, I hope you'll agree, who does not have innovation on his or her mind. And when you talk about innovation, it is super critical that we have diversity of thought at the workplace. And when we have people all thinking alike, everybody trying to fit into a single mode, innovation is certainly going to suffer. And we have tried our best to make sure that, therefore, inclusion is at the heart of everything we do. Obviously, you know, the movement started with gender equality. We have made big strides in including persons with disability, and LGBTQI plus is also a huge priority for us. So innovation and the diversity of thought that it requires is one big area for us. The second thing is that we are constantly reminded by our young employees. I'm so thrilled to see our young employees who join us from colleges today. You know, Accenture and many of the other large technology companies in India, we hire tens of thousands of people every year from colleges. And these people are very, very vocal about their love and passion for equality. And it's a huge refreshing change for me that our young employees are now reminding us that we need to drive inclusion, and they have been, to a great extent, you know, guiding light for us, which is this is a huge change. The third thing is that we cannot disregard the economic power of LGBTQI community, Jessica, on one hand, you see that a large section of them live under poverty. At the same time, if you were to look at them as a community, they do have a significant size. And I do remember reading a research which said that if LGBTQI were to be a country, it would be the 4th largest economy in the world. So obviously, people from the community, their families are going to have a huge impact and influence on which brand people choose versus not choose. So there are these compelling drivers, even wearing a business lens as to why this is an important topic. So then what's the problem, right? Why? So the challenge is that we find that there exists a gap between what the top leaders think versus what employees experience on the ground, right? Whatever your policies, are your employees able to experience that? And obviously there tends to be a gap there. We conducted a research, and you might be familiar with it, Jessica, that we do conduct a regular research on this topic. Our data shows that globally only 14% of the people believe that their employer is doing enough for the community. Only 37% of the people feel comfortable to express their sexual orientation and preferences. And that number really plummets to, I think, 20% or so when it comes to top management. So obviously this calls for all organizations to have a very structured approach to it. You need to have an enterprise-wide program with a very, very serious commitment from the top and cascading it down all the way, which is what we have done. Now for Accenture, it makes we do have a daunting challenge simply because of our size. So in India, for example, we have upwards of 250,000 employees. And it means that if we have to bring change to that size of an audience, we really need to have a sense of urgency instilled into everyone, which was the reason why we have taken up with so much passion.
Thanks so much, Mahesh. That was very structured, just as your solutions to the homophobia and transphobia are. But I really like that. And you said something really crucial. You said, not only do we need a structured approach to foster diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it has to be from the top and meaningfully cascade down. And I really appreciate that. You know, I've been invited into many corporate settings, and sometimes I'll be speaking with, C-suite executives, and they'll ask me, does it really matter if I deliver a speech in honor of Transgender Day of Visibility or in honor of LGBT Pride? And the answer absolutely is yes. All it takes is consulting LGBTQI employees to see how they feel recognized and seen on those days, to know that they feel safer at work as a result of those statements. So I really appreciate that very much. And thank you also for using data. Zainab, I want to go next to you, if I may. And we're going to post your bio in the chat as well. But there's so many directions where I can go for you. But let me start with a point that actually that Mahesh referenced, which is something about the purchasing power of the LGBTQI plus community. And I think the question for you is really, how does a company's sector or customer base tend to impact decisions on workplace inclusivity? It's not only about ideals, right? It's also about who the customers are and what they expect. So what do you think, Zainab?
This question, Jessica, and thank you, Mahesh, for speaking out so interestingly, and Amitabh as well from the access perspective. I have a slightly different take when it comes to customer base, because when you're talking about a customer base in a billion plus populated country like India, it means different people for it has extremely different connotations at the workplace, at the market space, where you stand from a market. So I believe if I were just able to build on to what Mahesh and Amitabh mentioned, is that when you look at it as a competitive difference, we have studies.
Zainab, something just happened to your microphone and you became quiet. Could you speak up, or maybe if something's on the microphone, just move it?
Are you able to hear me now?
For me, you're a little bit quiet. Maybe if you could just speak loudly.
this work now?
I can hear. Are others able to hear Zainab? So?
A little faint for me as well.
Okay, people are saying it's a low voice, not clear. Do you want to try again, Zainab?
It's better now.
Perfect. Whatever
Okay.
you did, that was the trick. Thank you.
I just changed the voice setting. So for me, if I look at diversity as a competitive differentiator, we've seen organizations like McKinsey, who said that with every 10% increase in gender diversity, an organization's business raised by 3.5%. Whether we look at Harvard Business Review, which also discovered that diverse companies are 70% more likely to capture new markets. But at the end, if I were to look at it from an LGBT community market space perspective, let's look at what's happened in India over the last several years. Until a couple of years ago, when we still had Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code still being active and the decriminalization had not happened, a lot of corporates ignored a large customer base named LGBTIQ plus people in India. They ignored the fact that there are 1 million plus people in India who may self-identify or may not self-identify as LGBTQ, but made influencing decisions based on their own perception about what an organization's services or products may be. What has actually happened over a period of time with the reading down of Section 377, pride has suddenly taken center stage. Look at the whole lot of advertisements coming in right after the reading down of Section 377. Now, without naming brands, but you had jewelry brands, you had FMCG companies, you had transport organizations, you had people in the professional services sector, you had people in the BFSI sector, and many, many more, which came out openly in support of the LGBTQ talent within the workspace, as well as went all their way out to woo the marketplace. So this is very important for us to kind of realize that the organizations also have been able to build and ride on the wave of decriminalization. And year after year, we do see a lot of progressive marketing keeping into mind not only the LGBT community, but as Mahesh pointed out, they kept in mind the quotient of millennials at the workplace. What about the talent that we aim to attract? Keeping this in mind, LGBT inclusion is not only a thing of the past. It is not only a good thing, an ethical thing to do. It's actually a great thing to do from a business perspective. Now, for the last 3 years, I have been working in a professional services organization. And believe me, with each passing day, I have seen more and more requests for proposals coming to us with a significant marking telling what is your diversity quotient all about? Is your environment and social safeguards actually taking care of LGBTQ population? Is there pay parity? Now, this is a fantastic marker, Jessica, to talk about how intrinsic do brands and organizations actually look at LGBT inclusion. So moving ahead from the mere tokenism that people talked about by waving pride flags and having rainbow cupcakes, here we're talking about more meaningful inclusion, because it's not only a good thing to do from a business perspective, but a great thing to do from a profitability and a market capture perspective.
Zainab, that was very interesting. I wasn't aware that there had been such a sort of market shift in the visibility of LGBTQI customers and support for LGBTQI rights as a corporate value after the fall of 377. And that's a really important example of how the law has a relationship with society and the enabling environment for the private sector. Because there may be corporate actors that we're taking out pride ads in other countries, but as long as 377 was on the books, it was a real barrier. I just want to emphasize a point that you made, and I think it was nuanced. It's not that pride flags and rainbow cupcakes aren't welcome. We want pride flags and rainbow cupcakes because visible markers of inclusion matter. But what you're saying is that it has to go far beyond that. and I think if I understand you right, Zainab, you're actually saying that in a for-profit context, we can't just talk about LGBTQI inclusion as a moral issue or a human right. We have to make the business case for inclusion, because ultimately that's what's going to drive meaningful engagement with these issues. Have I understood you correctly? Yeah. Okay, great. Let me continue on with our panel, and I don't want to keep putting you on the spot, Amitabh, but I'm going to ask you to go next, if I may, in part because you spoke so eloquently on the first question. And I'd like to ask you a little bit about the experience of Axis Bank directly, because I think in some ways this conversation is a case study for people who are looking to make similar progress in their own corporate settings and workplaces. So I'd love to ask you, when you were trying to bring more diversity, equity, and inclusion to Axis, did you encounter resistance or inertia? What were some of the worst things that you heard? Because there are always adversaries, even when we have a good idea. And most importantly, how did you respond to those who were hesitant?
Well, the decision to embrace this was taken at the highest levels in the bank, and I chair that committee where we took the decision. You know, we are spread across India. We have 4,600 branches, every nook and corner of India. And, you know, one of the worries we had, or the questions we asked ourselves, is there could always be some elements in some part of India who might not like what we are doing because they just find a cause or no cause, but they do find a cause, and you know how things can go off in a very different direction in India. But we deep inside knew it was the right thing to do, and we had to take the tough calls. We did. It went off very well to start with, absolutely not a problem. But you know, you try to educate all your staff about what they need to do, how they need to do to deal with the community. And we did have a pretty, we had a case in one of the larger cities in India where some people approached one of our branches to open an account. Our branch people could not understand what the request was. They kept, you know, making them run around a little bit. And the people who got treated that way, unknowingly, not consciously, unknowingly, tweeted about it. And it was obviously a storm took off against us that we don't understand, we don't know how to treat people, etc., etc. Obviously, you know, we knew that something like this could happen, but it did happen. I think we reacted the way we should have. We obviously went to the people concerned and apologized to them and said that it is a mistake. It is a mistake, genuine mistake made. Yes, we need to do a lot of work, but that does not mean that we stop doing it because this has happened. We obviously took care of their immediate problem, and we realized that we need to train our people more. I do believe that we are mentally prepared that this could happen again somewhere, because again, with the kind of attrition we have, with the kind of, you know, myriad requests which you get for all kinds of products and services. This is not the only thing we do. Sometimes people don't know, or they don't know how to react, or you know, you might have been trained about it, but when you are faced with it, you suddenly, you know, you tend to behave differently, or you're lost. So in that sense, we are mentally prepared that we could see some of these things pan out again, and there could be a storm again. But if the organization is steadfast and prepared that, yes, if that problem happens, this is how you're going to go about tackling it, I think it's not a big problem. On the positive side, as we have gone, for example, we you know, ran a program where we wanted to recruit people. We, you know, held a national coming out day that is celebrated world over on 11th October. We did a drive on 9th, I think, October. That drive saw the participation of about 1,430 candidates. We selected 557 candidates. A lot of people from outside the bank have reached out to Axis employees and congratulated them. A lot of leaders have reached out to me personally and said that this is a gutsy move in India, and we appreciate that you have taken the move of this kind, and it gives us the strength to go and do something about it. So the congratulatory messages, the fact that we did something like that has been well recognized in the marketplace, and I think it's only spurred us on to do more and you know, invest more in this field to ensure that we can provide the right workplace to the LGBTQI community. So overall experience has been extremely positive, but be prepared for some of these things to come and hit you.
Very practical advice. Be prepared, but don't give up. You know, Before I joined the State Department, I ran an international human rights organization. And one of the things I had to do in my job was, of course, fundraise. And I'm a policy analyst, so it's not easy to make that shift to fundraising. So I read all the books, I went to all the trainings, I wanted to be a good fundraiser if that was part of my job. And one of the things that I learned that always stayed with me was that people feel really good when they are charitable. They feel really good when they do the right thing. And I think that's sort of connects with something that you said, Amitabh. You know, your colleagues, your peers reached out to you to congratulate you for the leadership that you showed. And as a result, it spurred you to further action. And I wish some of the CEOs that are not a part of this conversation today could hear that, because I think there's so much fear of backlash, and we really need to create platforms like these to say, actually, it not only created success in the marketplace, happier employees, but even generated industry approval. So thanks a lot for sharing that story. Mahesh, I'd love to put the same question to you. Did you face inertia? What did you do when you found it, and how did it go overall as you fought for inclusion at Accenture?
Well, first of all, very inspiring, Amitabh. I mean, lots of lessons to learn. We started our activities, Jessica, back in, before 2016, but particularly since 2016, before Section 377 was abrogated. I wouldn't say there was any overt resistance, but obviously it became very clear that we have a long way to go to educate people, to create awareness, to sensitize people on various topics. I mean, let's face it, this is not a topic that gets discussed at the dinner table at any average Indian home, isn't it? So it was very clear that we have to work very hard to create awareness. Now, globally in Accenture, we have a very strong, well-defined Pride program since 1995, almost, in countries that permit it. But in India, obviously, we had some limitations. So what we started doing is to work on that awareness agenda. And I think Amitabh referred to that that unconscious bias that we may have. Jessica, you referred to it as well. So one of the first steps we did was to make a mandatory training on unconscious biases for all our employees. Then that covered everything, it's LGBTQ plus, it covered gender inclusion and so on and so forth. So that was amongst the very first steps. Then a number of other things, but I would probably call out two things that I thought made a big difference. First was the appointment for of an executive sponsor, a senior executive from the community, and that sent a very positive signal to the LGBT community inside of Accenture. It was a clear signal that this matters to the company and it's okay for them to come and express themselves. So they had somebody to go to, and it gave that additional comfort factor. The other thing that I thought worked very well is we took a storytelling approach, where we encouraged people to come and their stories, their friends' stories. So it could be first person or third person. And that did two things. Again, it was a greater confidence. It gave greater confidence and comfort to members of the LGBTQ community. They could come and talk about the hardships that they face inside the company. Personally, it also helped in sensitizing their other colleagues on things like code switch, where somebody's behavior is forcing somebody else to tone down certain aspects of their personality. So the storytelling approach kind of worked really well in multiple ways. We also started the effort to build an ally network, and in the first year itself, we had, I think, a network of roughly 800 allies. So overall, just this before abrogation of Section 377, this focus on scaling up our awareness program and just sticking to it with senior sponsorship, I thought has gone down well. And then, of course, we followed up with lots of different actions.
Thanks, Mahesh. So I heard mandatory unconscious bias training, appointing an executive sponsor, taking a storytelling approach, and building an ally network were 4 crucial ingredients, which is very good. It's very concrete. I really appreciate that. Before I go to Zainab, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the storytelling approach. Is there a story that stands out for you from one of your colleagues? You know, it could be an LGBTQI employee who told their truth, or it could be the story of an ally who found their way forward.
I think, I mean, I wouldn't call out one story, but basically we have globally within Accenture, we have some very, very senior professionals who have fought their way to the executive committee level, global Accenture leadership level. Very inspiring stories about how they had to conquer the bias, the kind of additional efforts that they had to put in, and how they are now trying to inspire the community. This goes right up to the very top levels of our leadership. I don't want to name particular individuals, but I can see that our people relate to those stories, and their colleagues coming and expressing themselves. It really gives that confidence to members of the LGBTQ community, and it also creates awareness. And going back to the point that you mentioned, Jessica, earlier, that everybody at the end of the day, most people want to be charitable. They feel good when they when they do something good, and this is, I can relate to that. I can see that every time you sensitize a person and that person's eyes open up towards the community, I can see that they feel good. So we just have to spread this light.
Thank you, Mahesh. I really appreciate that. Zainab, you know I'm coming to you next. I can't resist. You had all the data and all the hard points the first time around. So I wanted to ask you to bring it to brass tacks. It's very good to think about what we can do within companies, but of course, we also need to think about the legal and policy environment outside of companies. So I wanted to ask you, what are the legislative barriers? You know, what legislation is lacking for LGBTQI people in India? You know, what are some of the top priorities for civil society? And what's really holding LGBTQI plus inclusion back in the workplace?
This is my favorite question, Jessica. I happen to have the good fortune of working on a USAID-supported regional aspect project on being LGBTI in Asia, and I keep mentioning it every time. So I was a policy analyst on human rights, working with the UN system, and this was exactly what we championed in South and Southeast Asia. So I look at it from a slightly different lens. Like if I were to look at the global legal index, and from an inclusion perspective, there are 4 to 5 ways of dividing any country. A country which has 0 laws, a country which has decriminalization, a country which has some anti-discrimination legislation, greater inclusion, and the most inclusion. I think India, to a certain extent, is somewhere between non-discrimination, decriminalization of homosexuality, and some anti-discrimination policies. And these policies are more or less restricted to transgender persons only because the Protection of Transgender Persons Act. And like many organizations, corporate understand compliance is better because that's how we get pulled up for it. Now, having said that, look at what the situation has been over the last 4 years in India. The policy landscape is changing rapidly. Earlier on, when we talked about prevention of sexual harassment at the workplace, we limited our understanding to gender, and in gender only, we only thought about female minorities to be covered in, female sex assigned at birth minorities. Now, if you look at it today, many organizations, whether they are multinational organizations or Indian organizations, they are taking it a notch higher by challenging this and saying that if I'm going to look at anti-discrimination at the workplace, if I'm going to look at harassment and in particular context, sexual harassment at the workplace, let me aim for gender neutrality. Is there a provision in the law to do it? Definitely the law is skewed towards women and girls, but it also allows you to add a few areas depending on the need of the organization. So a lot of organizations have tried to make it gender neutral by looking at issues of harassment, whether it's harassment on the grounds of religion, culture, body shaming, etc., so on and so forth, and from a sexual harassment perspective, realizing now that LGBTIQ people, one, do not have access to redressal mechanisms, and even if they do have access to redressal mechanisms, are they empowered enough? Because if you're talking about zero occurrence, zero tolerance, and mitigation of harassment at the workplace, these three measures have to be put in place. So the empowerment of LGBTIQ community, both in and outside the workplace, is actually very important. If I see what is happening in the policy landscape, all the advancement that has happened in India on the legal front, challenging an archaic law, has been due to strategic litigation by communities affected directly. And in a way that kind of reverses what Consul David mentioned, is that the onus of inclusion is on those who are already included. So the onus of inclusion here was taking litigation to the court by the people who were the most excluded. So whether it was the Section 377 judgment, whether it was the right to privacy judgment, whether it was the Transgender Protection Act, which I was also party of, the Marriage Equality Act, which is now talking about, because we have various governments trying to put in different points of view, very diverse points of view, talking about culture, religion, what is acceptable within standards, etc., of culture within India. So the road is absolutely long. There is little to no political support. Most of the political support comes in from opposition parties. But if you realize that the next logical step is to bring in very stringent anti-discrimination laws or a legislative framework around that. Now, in the absence of that, what has happened in the last 4 years, the government hasn't been able to act on some of the court's recommendation on building a pipeline of anti-discrimination programs. Now, this, I feel, once you put that in place, some of the harassment at the workplace, in the families, in the societies, in the public spaces will tend to come down, because people will realize, and we've seen examples of that. We've seen people going to police stations if there is online harassment, if going to police stations if there is same-sex partner violence and abuse, if there is abuse on, but it is definitely not universal in nature, and it is very sporadic, but at least a beginning has been able to be achieved. As we move ahead with different trajectories on marriage equality law, on anti-discrimination, on reservation in job and other economic spheres, I think we'll start getting more and more refined. And the India Incorporated has a very large role to play in this, because my personal opinion is that whether we are a vote bank large enough for a political party to consider us seriously, I think India Incorporated and the private sector in general has been always in the forefront for trying to champion for rights. So when people were still decriminalized, and I think groups like Accenture, etc., led the way in terms of having pride for communities, having an allyship program, having same-sex partner benefits. In certain organizations, there is already provision for biological assistant, for assistive technologies, for reproduction, etc., so on and so forth. And I think this is only paving the way for in future for a more inclusive workspace and a more inclusive community. Because with the ESG standards becoming more and more common, we realize that it's just not enough to be a great and inclusive workspace. We need to kind of give back to our communities and the societies that we come from. And I see anti-discrimination, marriage equality, see adoption of rights, and larger harassment at the workplace becoming key issues over the next 5 years, where you wish to engage with the government and the lawmakers to make it a more equitable roadmap for LGBTIQ communities.
Well, it looks like people figured out how to use the applause feature, and you were getting applause the whole time you were speaking, Zainab. So you have a lot of people who were agreeing with you completely. So thank you so much for that. Let me say one substantive thing and then one logistical issue. I just want to really lift up your point about the importance of non-discrimination progress in the courts and in legislation, non-discrimination goes much further than the LGBTQI plus community alone. Non-discrimination laws are good for everyone because, as we've been talking about repeatedly, no one should be subject to discrimination or violence because of who they are, whether it's because of their gender, sexuality, faith, ethnicity, race, ability, etc. So I really appreciate that. And I think, your point about the value of gender neutrality in sexual harassment law is a really important one. And as someone who comes out of doing women's rights work and feminist work, what I often explain to people is that by removing the focus solely on women in sexual harassment laws and focusing on gender equality and preventing sexual harassment for everyone, we're actually making a stronger and more inclusive framework. And we should never remove the focus on those who are most vulnerable to sexual harassment, because then, of course, women and LGBTQI people are still quite visible. But we want to make it clear that women are not the only ones subject to harassment in the workplace. They may be disproportionately subject, but they are not the only victims. I want to check in with my colleagues from the consulate and to ask, we seem to have a very active group in the chat. Should I open to Q&A at this point, or should we do a couple more questions from me to the panel? David, your camera's on, so I can't help but put you on the spot. We can also open it for the chat for Q&A from the audience and then come back to the panel. It's really as you wish.
Yeah, Jessica, this is Yoon.
Well, so,
Yeah, sorry, David, to cut
sorry,
you.
go ahead, Yoon.
I think we can go ahead and continue with some more questions, but let's remind the audience that we are taking questions via the chat box, or even better, the Q&A box that all the attendees can see. So please remember that you are part of the conversation, and you can do that by entering your questions into those boxes. We are monitoring them and passing them on to our moderator, Jessica. Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much, Yoon. That was really helpful. Trying to follow the rules correctly, and feel free to nudge me if I'm going too long with the panel. And I'm not at this point seeing questions coming to me directly from you, Yoon. So if you don't mind messaging me so that I don't miss any, that would be great.
Certainly.
And I was asked, there's one participant in this conversation right now who's hard of hearing, and they're really enjoying the conversation, but asked, will a recording be made available so that people can follow it in case they're having difficulty following the conversation? And I was informed that yes, we'll make a recording available after to make it as accessible as possible. Mahesh, I have put Amitabh on the spot and asked him to go first on all of the corporate questions, so I have to take the liberty of putting you in the hot seat this time. And I think I want to, there's so many questions I could ask you, but I think I want to ask you one of the nuts and bolts questions, which is about employee recruitment and retention. We know that when LGBTQI employees don't feel safe, welcome, or respected, they have a high turnover in their workplace. They're denied promotions, they're denied raises, they're denied recognition for their accomplishments. So what is Accenture doing to encourage LGBTQI plus employee recruitment and retention?
So since 2018, we have been making a conscious effort to recruit from the LGBTQI community. We sponsor community-specific job fairs, and of course, we participate with them as well. So we have multiple partners who have been helping us in the recruitment. Of course, we follow the same standard meritocracy requirements that we have, but this has essentially helped us in expanding in our outreach to the community, and which is giving us some very good results, and we definitely want to keep working further on that. When it comes to retention, I think it really boils down to creating a sense of belonging for the organization, and it's about creating an environment where the employees feel safe to express themselves, and it's a place they feel they can bring their full potential to and build a long-term career. So on one hand, we continue to build awareness amongst our larger population. On the other hand, we have tried to remediate many of our policies that Zainab was referring to. We have taken a conscious look at a lot of our policies to make them gender neutral. In the last 12 to 18 months or so, we have, I think we have remediated more than 25 of our critical policies. Things like, maternal leave or parental leave or bereavement leave. Our insurance policies have greater gender neutrality into it. So remediating those policies has been going on. We are now publicly celebrating our Pride program, and this goes back to creating that awareness that in Accenture, discussion on this topic and publicly expressing yourself is perfectly okay. So I think our public celebrations have gone down very well, not just with the LGBTQ community, but with our greater population as well. We also talk a lot about the unique phenomena in the technology industry where we are really short of talent. And to me, deep skills in is the mantra to success. It is a great leveler, if you ask me. Anybody who has deep skills has enormous opportunities. So we are placing a lot of importance in providing that deep skills and making specific efforts on our women employees, on our LGBTQI employees, helping them bridge the skills gap, if at all, and helping them go to the next level and beyond, which naturally creates those opportunities for them and the pull from the projects to attract. I think this whole virtuous cycle is what goes back to what I said earlier, to create that sense of belonging and to give a feeling that this is a place where one can build long-term career. Here it's a journey. We know that we have a long way to go, but this is a conscious effort so far.
Thank you, Mahesh. And I love the way you're sort of linking an argument for diversity, equity, and inclusion with a classic challenge in the corporate sector, which is there's a talent gap. And you're saying, I know the solution for filling the talent gap. Amitabh, if I'm not mistaken, we only have you for 5 more minutes, which is very unfortunate because you've had a lot of powerful words, but you also have so many questions coming into you in the chat. So I saw 2, at least. One was really important, which was it's sort of buried in the chat somewhere, but the question was basically, what are the Axis Bank guidelines for respecting, for creating pathways for name and gender marker changes among your customers? And another question was what I've never seen anywhere else before, so I have to ask you because I saw it. It was basically, should we offer better interest rates to LGBTQI people? As a queer person myself, I'm very interested in that question. But the basis of it was, could better interest rates for LGBTQI plus persons become catalytic of greater inclusion quickly?
Any question which has any commercial impact, we tend to see very quickly. So I did see that question. Well, the regulator has very clear guidelines on how we treat our customers, and all the customers, like people, need to be treated with equality is the mantra for treating people. RBI is also which is our regulator, is also quite conscious that every depositor needs to be treated equally. So in that sense, we cannot go and offer special rates to people. Yes, there are some specific guidelines where senior citizens have been allowed better interest rates, but right now there is nothing else which allows us to offer special rates to people. But yes, it doesn't end. It's not just about giving a higher interest rate. It is about, I think the bigger problems, and I'm sure Zainab has seen a lot of it, and I've been hearing her very with a lot of interest, that they face a lot of issues in just getting simple banking services through. Just giving interest rate is not enough. Are they able to get a loan easily? Are they able to get a loan of any kind easily? Are they able to get themselves serviced easily when they either go to a bank or digitally or otherwise? So I think when we entered this arena and embraced it, one of the questions we asked ourselves is, can we ensure that all the banking services can be provided in a form and a shape where they don't feel that they're excluded? So yes, one of the things which we did was we made the account changes so that they're required to call them the Mr. or Mrs. or whatever. So And that is important change because you have to go and change the entire technology for it. So we are one of the first banking institutions which has actually gone and done that change in our systems, where people are not required to become gender specific. They can, whatever decision they want, they can take, and it is okay with us. They can open joint accounts with people, if you're a lesbian, you can open a joint account, which was again not possible in the systems earlier. Because, when initially the software was created, no one thought that you would have a future where all this will be very much a part of what community we live in. So wish we could offer better interest rates. There are some constraints there, but yes, we are working on all parts of banking services and products to ensure that people can access them easily, seamlessly, and they do not see that subtle discrimination come through, which we sometimes don't even realize because we're so used to operating in a world of a different kind. I'm not saying that we've done everything, and that's why we have a team which is leading us and directing us and driving us to ensure that we can take care of these small subtle differences which we sometimes don't even notice. And Harish, as I said, has been leading the way for us for quite some time. But we will get there. I think as we become more sensitive, as some of these things are pointed out to us, I think we'll get better and better at it. And if the intent is right, we will get there. It's just a matter of time.
I love your optimism. I'm disappointed on a personal level that you can't give better interest rates to LGBTQI plus persons, but of course I'm teasing you. I didn't expect you to say yes to that, but thank you for your commitment to follow through, to training, to good policies, and we wish you a wonderful evening as the conversation continues with the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Mahesh and Zanab. Great listening to you, and David and Jessica. Thank you so much. I do have to go. My apologies, but thanks a lot for inviting me here. Really, really appreciate it. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Amitabh.
Thank you.
Zainab, we're going to go to you next. I think we've been talking a lot about the world that we dream of, and how we have to create internal and external policy environments. We need to develop the policies with good training. We need to ensure that leadership affirms the principles of non-discrimination, equity, and inclusion. But what we haven't said is that there are some institutions that really have a history of deep cultural bias against LGBTQI persons, that not all companies are starting in the same place. And so I wanted to ask you, for our friends who are listening, who might be working in a place where they really don't feel welcome, but they really want to change their workplace, what can organizations do to be proactive in challenging really deep cultural bias against LGBTQI plus persons?
That's a very important question, Jessica, and thank you for bringing this up. In fact, in some of the stories that I talk about my own personal journey and my own career growth, there are multiple organizations which I have encountered who wanted to hire me as a diversity candidate, but was so internally homophobic or transphobic that it was difficult to understand how I would have survived in a particular organization. I remember once being recruited for an international NGO in Mumbai, who said that if we don't give jobs to people like these, who else would? And I thought for one moment, my own personal value was brought down to the fact that I just was a different person because I identified as a transgender woman. So my academic qualifications, the value I brought, my brand did not really matter. Only my body and my body expressions mattered when it came to, performing on a job. But having said that, I think what you said brings to the fore that when we talk about diversity and inclusion today, we realize that it's just not about Pride Month. It's just not about Pride initiatives. And I must take this moment to congratulate Consul General David, who I happen to know personally for the last 2 years, on various events of the American Chamber of Commerce, of the US Embassy event, has constantly been striving for LGBT equality. And this goes to the fact, the testimony that he has personally made sure that inclusion is not tokenistic. We are not only talking about LGBT inclusion in a limited space, in a limited dialogue around diversity and inclusion, but actually practicing it. And kudos to him. And I wish there are more world leaders and leaders in other embassies who are going to be taking this agenda forward. Coming back to the question that you made, for me, it was that for organizations who are doing this great, thank you. But we need to realize that this cannot be a one-time campaign or a one-off initiative. We need to be constantly promoting it at the workplace, because in order for it to be effective, for it to be efficient and to be relevant, it has to change. But it also brings to mind the fact that it requires empathetic leadership. And only empathetic leaders, like I had two great leaders on the call, Mahesh and, because today I just have Mahesh now, but, just to talk about from the Axis experience and from the Accenture experience, great leaders are able to cultivate a great workforce. You need, leaders who are able to come forward, talk about it, and then the change also happens, but also working on the culture of the organization. Today, in today's time, and especially the cultural, political climate of our country, we realize that LGBT issues do not exist in a vacuum. We have to talk about intersectionality of caste, religion, economic status, regionality, ethnicity, all of these, language, all of these actually, and religion to an extent, also play a very important role on inclusion of LGBTIQ people. Like for me, a lot of people think, oh, it's actually great to have someone like Zainab Patel working with us because she fits within the caricature of how we would like to see an acceptable trans person as. So in general, what we want to do is create stereotypes around how LGBTIQ folks should look, behave, and act out in public. So I think when it comes to the larger piece of culture, we cannot be blind to the fact that we cannot talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about discrimination, without talking about violence, without talking about economic, inequalities. The same place in India, we don't have a homogeneous lot called LGBTIQ people. We are extremely heterogeneous and on the extreme boundaries of different intersectionality. Like for me, because I actually come from a Catholic family, Jessica, but I chose a Muslim name. My partner is Muslim. But I do not understand the issues when it comes. I may not experience discrimination based on caste or religion, but someone else would. And I may perhaps be seen as an okay person, maybe because I do not wear a hijab. Or I could speak fluent English, or I may be articulate. So for me, tackling all of these underlying currents are equally important. Like just we talk about looking at issues of stigma until we come to the drivers of this every activity in terms of building cultural competency to work with LGBTIQ people are not going to be successful until you look at the elements of religion, of economics, of caste, of ethnicity, of regionality, especially in a very diverse country like India. So for me, when I look at the diversity and inclusion policy, and we're specifically talking about equity today, equity is about moving beyond, meritocracy, but looking at the history of marginalization that these historically marginalized groups in our country have faced and bringing in measures. So for me, first step is, what is it that we need to do to make our workplace safe? Are our policies by design inclusive or by default excluding LGBTIQ people? And because we chose to do nothing about it, it is perfectly fine if we exclude LGBTI. This is a question that you need to ask yourself. Every organization needs to do that. That is it okay to exclude an LGBTIQ person out of the primary caregiver leave just because my language is not neutral? Then it's time for you to do that reflection internally. The second thing is, make your commitment public. Start off with allyship building workshops within the organization. You do not need to ask people to come out. You can come out as an ally. And I think Harish did an exemplary job in terms of, having this National Coming Out Day where we are telling people, it's time for you to step out of the closet of bigotry, of transphobia, of homophobia, and come out as an ally. The third thing is, start sensitizing your performance managers, your people's managers, talking about it in external forums by participating in benchmarking studies. And lastly, whether your digital footprint, whether your social responsibility footprint actually has the imprint of working with most marginalized communities like LGBTIQ. While it's great to tom-tom it internally, are we going to walk the talk and go external? Because until today, the Companies Act under the CSR, corporate social responsibility, doesn't include trans or LGBTIQ people as the most marginalized. So it does take effort, it does take commitment, And it does take a lot of leadership potential to stand out there and give a message that my organization is there for the cause of LGBTI inclusion. And this is what we practice day in and day out, not only radiating it internally, but moving out from an external perspective as well.
Zainab, so powerful and clear. Are our workplaces safe, you say, is the first question. And I think that's really powerful. In other words, even places that have deep cultural bias against LGBTQI persons need to ensure that no one is subject to harm just for coming to work. And I appreciate that you said it takes work. It takes work to create a non-discrimination policy and methodology and training. It's also the right thing to do, and it pays off. I want to open it to some questions from the audience now. And Mahesh, I'm going to turn to you to kick off responding to the audience. And let me invite the audience. We still have a lot of people on the line, and we want to hear from you and hear your questions. Thank you so much for engaging so thoughtfully in the chat already. Mahesh, as I've been following the chat, I have seen probably at least five questions that are about the relationship between access to education and success in the workplace. And I think it's really, honestly, it surprises me that so many people made that correlation. But I think what people are saying is, if you're subjected to bullying in the schools, if you don't have access to a good education because you're perceived to be gender nonconforming, you're punished more than other students, you're harassed by faculty or fellow or your playmates, then it makes it really hard to get a good job eventually. So I'm putting a couple of questions together, but I'm going to choose one from Neville Joes, I believe, or Jose if we're in Mexico. Can the corporate social responsibility activities of corporates include the support for education of the LGBTQ+ community? And here I'm taking education to mean multiple kinds of education. The school education that multiple people talked about, but also education in terms of things like know your rights.
That's a great question. And I think it's an extremely relevant question, at least to my industry, Jessica, and I'll tell you why. So we look at this particular challenge in two ways. One is CSR, and I'll come to that a little later. But to me, this has to become mainstream. So if you look at the technology industry, I call ourselves the consumers of talent. We have had this practice where we go to engineering colleges and we look to recruit people with the same educational background with the assumption that an engineering degree brings us all the skills. In Accenture, we have started questioning ourselves, and we've created a priority that we want to be a net creator of talent, right? Just the way you want to be carbon neutral, why can't I be a net creator of talent? What does that mean? So on one hand, we will continue to recruit from the engineering colleges, but on the other hand, we realize that that kind of makes us a very homogeneous looking workforce. So we go to people with different educational backgrounds, and that even now includes people who don't have engineering degree, who may have a very basic education, and we are now going to even people who may not have a degree whatsoever, right? So it may be in somewhere in between, like in 12th pass, etc. So as we are making that changes, we are also making a change to our assessment methods, because I can't administer the same test to an engineer and somebody who is just a high school graduate, isn't it? So we are making that change. And we are also making changes to our training investments that we make to everybody who comes into our organization, because again, training needs of different people will be different. So in other words, this creating the talent has now become a business priority for us, and it is allowing us to reach out to a lot broader section of our society, including LGBTQI. Now, where CSR comes in is that our associations with our partners are helping us to have that outreach into, let's say, LGBTQI community or women who have been somehow faced a lot of challenges, etc. So that is where CSR and our business priorities come together. The other training that we have started doing is basically the employability skills or soft skills, language or interpersonal communication. So we now have programs that are aimed at not just the people that we want to employ, but somebody else might employ as well. So how do we get to doing that? Entrepreneurship skills development, working with again many of our partners, is a big area for us, and we would absolutely welcome our LGBTQI friends to participate in many of those programs.
Thanks so much, Mahesh. Same question for you, Zainab, reframed slightly. Why is access to non-discriminatory education essential to the success of LGBTQI people throughout their lives in the workplace?
Well, there are multiple reasons for that. I think the fact is that a lot of us do not necessarily have the vision to take this to communities beyond our workplace. So while a lot of organizations are very invested in the cause of doing it internally, having sensitization programs, 101 on LGBTIQ issues, trans sensitivity, cultural competency training, I think when it comes to looking at it from a larger perspective, because this is of course my limited view about what organizations could be doing, is because the Corporate Social Responsibility Act doesn't really list out LGBTIQ as beneficiaries. While there's a definite call out for, say, women and children, for persons with disability, environment-related issues, LGBTIQ people, or for that matter, trans people, have not been called out. In fact, this was one of the representations we made to the minister, to the central minister, to ask them that, would you be willing to write to the Ministry of Corporate Affairs to kind of see if there can be an amendment in the Act rules in terms of asking the LGBTIQ or the trans community to at least get started to get included. Education is also seen more as a medium to long-term measure, Jessica, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people shy away from making the required investments in reaching out, educating, and empowering LGBTIQ people. Also because of the fact that we aren't a homogeneous lot. There is the urban community, people who speak English, people who might have access to safe spaces, people who might have access to online forums such as these, who may be able to participate in discussions, contribute, etc. And then largely there are those people who, because of the digital divide, because of the language divide, because of the cultural divide, may not be able to access, especially people who live in peri-urban areas or rural areas. And that is a large chunk, where a large chunk of discrimination actually happens, and minimalistic to no access to services, including education. So I think what is happening as we talk is that the government of India, through the Niti Aayog, which is the Erstwhile Planning Commission, has actually asked for a roadmap to be developed on policy actions for LGBTIQ community. And one of the sectors that we're looking at is education, in addition to, say, violence, livelihoods, personal safety, security, nutrition, health. So I think education becomes a large chunk, and hopefully over the next few years, we should be able to see a few policy and programmatic decisions trying to see how we can influence the roadmap when it comes to inclusive education.
Thanks so much, Zainab. And I saw a comment in the chat where someone said, today education systems offer little practical experience compared to the kinds of knowledge that working people need. And I just want to make clear, we're not saying there's one kind of experience or education that's more valuable than another. If you are a tradesperson, then you need to have access to non-discriminatory education to learn your trade. If you are a computer engineer, you need access to non-discriminatory education for engineering. The through line between this is simply that you should be able to participate in education and the workplace without discrimination, regardless of where you choose to operate. I want to go from there to another question, and I do welcome more questions in the chat if there are. I didn't see who asked this, but someone said, for smaller companies with the intent to be more inclusive, what is the most practical step to begin? So it's not an easy question. What is the most practical step to begin? Mahesh, you smiled. So that's like that's the Zoom equivalent of putting your hands up. Can I ask you to answer this question?
I'll give you my take on it. First of all, I don't think as long as the law doesn't come in your way, there is no need for anyone for us to wait to take an action. I firmly believe that this is something that makes business sense. So there is a lot for you to get diverse talent that adds a lot of value to your business. And that's if you believe in that, I think you must make a beginning. And the second thing is, you have to constantly show your commitment and sensitize the employee. So two things, not necessarily one.
It's almost impossible to answer with just one. Zainab, I want to go to another question that was asked of you specifically. Someone named Lavanya asked, what can allies in an organization do to help employees come out of the closet? Are there medical insurance policies that support gender transition surgeries?
I think allies do much more than that. I think the fact is that when you're an ally, the first thing you do is listen. You prioritize because you come from a position of privilege versus the other who may not be in the same position of privilege or power structure that you may actually belong to. So for me, allyship is much more than gender transitioning surgery policy decisions or same-sex partner insurance. Let me give you an example to also suit that, Jessica. I worked with an organization, without naming that, where we had same-sex partner insurance on the day I walked in. Now, in an organization with close to 30,000 people, we saw that the uptake was in very low double-digit numbers. And we tried to ask, what is the reason behind this? And it also stemmed from a flawed understanding of what may be a partner. And how do you define the partner? Is it a steady relationship? Is it a recognition relationship only necessarily recognized by law, whether in India or outside, etc., so on and so forth? So I guess the allyship journey continues. And when we then went on to extend insurance benefits to dependents, which could be your partner or your spouse's dependents as well, that's when the challenge actually accelerated. And that was when allies actually stepped in by saying that, no, we could do this to circumvent this legal tangle, etc. So I think what the ally does is they are good listeners. They stand up against homophobic, transphobic behavior at the workplace. So if you're sniggering at a homophobic, transphobic joke, whether there is some side conversation where you're deriding an LGBTIQ out person or an effeminate person or any other kind of diverse gendered expression, I think that's what is the basics of being an ally. You can be an ally in multiple ways. You do not necessarily need to take the rainbow flag and walk down Pride with a banner saying, hi, I'm in. I think there are myriad ways an ally can work: by doing research, by contributing to content, by signing up to be an ally, by wearing a lanyard. There are many different ways to do that. You could be a cheerleader for all I care. But the fact is that let's not look at allyship from the single lens of someone who's carrying a pride banner and say that I love LGBTIQ folks. There are various ways of showing support. One of them being, an active, visible ally, but there are myriad other ways that an ally can do work at the workplace.
If I could give an example of that, so you spoke about gender reassignment surgery. What we found is that whenever somebody is going through that, it is absolutely critical for us to counsel the team members and the supervisor, the person going through that surgery. Otherwise, the person could face challenges. So this is something that our allies do very effectively. So this is an example.
We love examples for allies. Since LGBTQI people are a statistical minority, our progress in part depends on having allies also claim these issues as priorities. I'm looking at the time, and it's really, this always happens. The more we talk, the more people are jumping in the chat. So I just want to say, we might not be able to get to all of the comments or questions, but I'm actively reading your reactions. I love hearing how you're taking the comments from the panelists. It's so useful. And I'm going to see if I can squeeze in at least one, if not two more questions. There's a question from Gopal Krishnan, and Gopal asked a question which is, in essence, what is the role of government and the private sector in the work for inclusivity, specifically LGBTQI plus inclusivity on the ground? And I think this is a really appropriate question as one of our final questions. So if our goal is to see the human rights of all LGBTQI plus persons recognized, what is the role of government and the private sector in that pursuit? Who would like to go first?
Zainab, would you like to go, or would you like me to answer? Give my take on it.
I have some very strong views on this one, but I'll allow you to speak.
No, please go ahead.
So I think, Jessica, when someone is an elected government of any country, the responsibility is for all citizens of the country. You don't say that I am a government only for 90% or 80% or 60% of the country. It's for all the citizens. And I remember this very clearly, that one of the ex-chief ministers of Maharashtra who came to a meeting hall with 2,000 trans people said that I am your chief minister. When I took the oath, it was not for men and women along, it was for people of all genders, of all castes, religion, etc. And I think that was a very, very powerful statement to make. So what do I expect the government to do? The first thing is that be true to our constitution, which says non-discrimination on the grounds of sex, which the Supreme Court also read to be, sex, sexuality, and gender. So the fact is that we expect non-discrimination. We expect protection from violence. We expect grievance redressal. We expect, access to jobs, markets, livelihoods. We also expect to enjoy the pursuit of life and happiness that includes the right to found a family, meaningful relationships, adoptive children, and if that's what people want. But this is the fact that we want every government, irrespective of whether you are at the province, you're at the central district, or at the national level. This is what we expect of every government to uphold. From the civil society and the private sector, let me talk about the private sector, and I've mentioned it earlier. I think the private sector is the single largest disruptor when it comes to LGBT issues and inclusion. Look at what we've been able to achieve in the last 5 years. Allyship across the country, pride advertisement, same-sex partner insurance, primary caregiver leave, adoption. Maybe some organizations offer adoption benefits as well. Insurance for health, for yourself, for your spouse, for your parents, dependents. And I think prioritization of product and services, like what Axis Bank did in the BFSI sector. So I think what the private sector is supposed to be doing is showing the way how organizations and countries can be more inclusive for LGBT. And believe me, this did not take a lot of effort physically. It required commitment, it required vision, it needed someone who can take charge of the situation and say, yes, this is an interest of my people. I remember the time that I used to work with the United Nations in Delhi, and this was the time when the global economic recession was at its all-time high. And what did the government do best? Was it took leadership, it took commitment, and it took a responsibility. I think this is what people look up to, the private sector is able to stand up tall. And when mentioning marginalized community, make sure they talk about LGBTIQ people and not say, oh, LGBTIQ, but loudly say out lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer people. This is what we mean. These are people, these are not identities, these are not labels, and these are definitely not an alphabet soup. So when they call us out, they send out a very positive message in all the forums, just again calling out exactly what our Council David has done in terms of calling out inclusion where it matters the most. And I think that is what heralds active change in every dialogue and discussion, by bringing people together, to provide them platforms to talk, to express, to give them opportunities for us to come and work together. I think this is what my expectation, both as someone sitting within the corporate as well as a lay LGBTIQ person in India, would want.
I see people found the applause button again as you were speaking, Zainab. So thank you so much for that rousing conclusion. Mahesh, we'll take your answer and then I'm going to close out the conversation. But please, we're loving your comments in the chat. So please jump in with your final thoughts to all of our participants. Tell us, did you like this conversation, and should the consulate in Mumbai organize more sessions, more conversations like this? Mahesh, final word.
Well, I can't add much to what Zainab said so eloquently. I completely agree on her views, particularly about businesses. Every business must say that this is my problem to solve. Sometimes you will say that, well, this is for the government to solve. We have to say that this is my problem too, and we have to solve it as well. And there is so much that we could do to get those policies right, to make sure that we are indeed taking the discrimination out of the game, giving everybody an opportunity, showing that unwavering commitment. There is so much that can be done, and it has to be every corporate's problem to solve as well.
Thank you, Mahesh. David, you've been getting a lot of love from Zainab, whether you like it or not. I'm just going to put you on the spot very quickly before I wrap up. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Well, first of all, huge appreciation to you, Jessica, and to the three panelists, Mahesh, Amitabh, and Zainab, for an absolutely extraordinary conversation. I was moved and riveted by everything that everybody said, and when I sort of envisioned with my team what I wanted this to look like, I don't think I could possibly have imagined that it would be so inspirational. And the reason why we wanted to do this relates directly to this last question. When I think about the history of the expansion of the human rights of LGBTQI plus people in the US, what I think about are the private sector companies who led the way before there was any marriage equality or any legal protections. You had companies who looked at the flexibilities that the existing laws gave them and looked for ways to provide benefits and opportunities and create LGBTQI plus friendly environments within their own companies. They did it, I think, in some cases because they believed in the cause, but in many cases, as we've heard very eloquently, because they recognized that this was going to be a huge boon to their company's bottom line. And I firmly believe, I mean, Jessica, you're an expert on these issues, so correct me if you think I'm misinterpreting history, but I think the US private sector played a huge role in leading the way, and you know, governments followed, and eventually we had a legal framework. And I see the same thing happening here in India. I'm totally inspired by the Indian companies that I have met, including the ones represented today, who have led the way. And I think that India is going to go the way of the US in the broader legal perspective, probably sooner rather than later. And the private sector will be owed a huge debt of gratitude for having played such an important leadership role. Thanks.
Thank you, David, and thanks for letting me put you on the spot like that. I appreciate it. It's never easy when you're suddenly called on. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying I feel like that we're on fire, and I'm looking at the chat and people are still commenting. You know, this is one of those times where you know that if we weren't living through a pandemic, we would all be in a room somewhere having this like amazing, vibrant conversation. And then we would go to like a cafe or a bar afterwards and we would continue and we would plot the way forward. There's clearly much more to be done. And, you know, I really appreciate this last question. You know, what is the role of the private sector and government in the fight for LGBTQI equality? And the way I would answer is, it's at the front lines alongside human rights organizations, LGBTQI persons themselves, allies, the medical community, educators, multilateral institutions. And what I mean to say in that is that if it were easy to get rid of homophobia and transphobia, we would have done it long ago. But the truth is, these are dangerous and serious influences that erode people's safety in their lives at the workplace. in every country in the world. And that's why this work really matters, because when we deny people their full human rights, we deny them so much. We starve them of the humanity and the dignity that they're entitled to. But the progress that we've talked about in this conversation shows we have momentum. And I feel very strongly that when we put our minds to it, we can move the needle, just as India has been doing over the last many years and will continue to do so. So I congratulate all of you on your great work. Mahesh, Zainab, really so thrilled to meet you both virtually. I hope one day we'll meet in person. Thank you to everybody for this amazing conversation, and may the struggle continue. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much.
Such a pleasure, David. Thank you for organizing this.